Hey Kayla, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Very well. Thanks for doing this today. Would you introduce yourself a bit?
Sure. I'm Kayla Killam. I was a Boyd. I was in the work for 10 years. My husband was in the work for 19. From Wisconsin, so is he. We're from the other opposite sides of the state. And
Yes, yes.
so we've kind of had parallel lives through, like, I knew
Mhm.
him as a child, and yet he went his way in the work and I went mine. So for me, I would like to say that I feel like it's kind of a hard ask to talk about the work having been in it because um, it's just very personal. Like everything that a worker would say would be a personal blow to somebody else, um,
Mhm.
to your coworkers whom you lived with and spent day and night with, whom you loved and had lots of experiences with and depended on each other.
Mhm.
Of course, there's good and bad with that, but we were bonded. And then, of course, with family. So when you leave, your family's kind of bowled over what do we do, and do we encourage them to go back in, or do we support them, and ultimately how do you handle a situation like leaving the work. And so
Yeah.
I myself am not immune to feeling hesitant to share, but ultimately I do feel
Mhm.
the responsibility to share a little bit about my experience. And mainly
Mhm.
because I've been really taken aback, shocked about how little people know, and understand maybe the grueling pain of it. And then the years of not, you can't really catch up, but of healing and finding yourself again.
Mhm.
So, and also
Right,
my
right.
sharing tonight isn't to preside over others or to prove that I'm right, but I
Mhm.
do believe that there is great lack, and
Mhm.
there's deeper things that have been wrong that we do need to measure and say out loud. We can say,
Mhm.
like, well, they meant well, but does that really mean that we follow them? Like, no.
Right.
So
Right.
we have to move past they meant well and work on some things. So I remember
Right.
telling our overseer shortly after the Dean Brewer episode happened, and a lot of things were brought to light. Like, we're going to need to be really careful to handle this thoughtfully and gently so that we don't divide families, and so
Mm.
that we make sure everybody is heard. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, that that was my dream of how the whole thing could be healed, but
Right.
didn't really happen. But anyway,
Yeah.
that's what I feel like we can still try to do, is to collectively be really aware that we do need to unite families. We're all in this together and have been for a pretty long time. So,
Yeah, I love that, Kayla, so much. I appreciate you even just saying that out loud because that in and of itself is so healing to know that we're in this together and we're trying to heal and move forward. And our stories, speaking them out loud, is part of that process. I love that.
mhm.
Do you feel comfortable, or would you like to start with a little bit of your background, maybe your childhood, or how you came into your lead up of going into the work?
Sure. I had a really awesome childhood, like a dream come true childhood. We lived,
Hmm.
out in the woods, and our family was close. We had great parents, still do, awesome siblings. We just had a blast.
Yeah.
Life was really simple. It was really close to home. We were raised very professing. So, like any fear of unknown or outside world it didn't exist. We were very safe. My
Mm.
parents were very serious and devout about the truth, about attending all the meetings. Like, we went to a Sunday morning meeting 45 minutes away, and it was,
Mhm.
just a few elderly folks, and that was our
Mhm.
Sunday. We often would stay, almost always, with some of them and have lunch, and then go another 40 minutes to gospel meeting. It was just the routine, like the well greased
Right.
system of that. Always a
Right.
midweek meeting or two, the cozy Wednesday studies, just all of that we
Mhm.
all know and loved and were bonded with immensely. There were no
Mhm.
skeletons in the closet at home. Everything was healthy and on par. Lots of, just solid
Mhm.
um, emotions. And
Yeah.
Um, anyway, we were very separated from the world. Like I said, we maintained every standard there ever was to be professing. with the clothing, and there wouldn't ever be a movie watched, or
Mhm.
nothing.
Mhm.
You drink milk and water, that's about it.
Yeah.
So, and I say this like
Yeah.
out of love, and also because um I can look on it and see how uncomfortable I've always been without there, like anything beyond
Mhm.
my living room, so to speak. So we were taught the
Mhm.
world was lost and we were the only lights in the world, like especially thinking of school and being the light
Mhm.
there. So we were aware of that. Um, and I believed that, and
Mhm.
it was very conflicting. I remember we'd drive to the cities a couple times a year, and I'd look at all those cars on the interstate and
Yeah.
just think like, what is wrong with you, God, that all these people are going to
Mhm.
hell? Just stop creating them if they're all going
Oh,
to go to
yeah.
hell. Like, this is, so I
Mhm.
had a hard time. Like, I loved him as my God, but I I also had a bit of a disrespect toward it. Like, this, I
Mhm.
can't accept this. There's too much loss and pain, and then it
Yeah.
feels like you're drowning when you're the one responsible for all that. So I just,
Totally.
my little self would look out the window and just be so troubled with that. So
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
anyway, I know that most everyone here has had those thoughts, and now we've all
Yeah.
been given the opportunity to unwrap them and examine them. So I say that openly because
Mhm.
my parents are taking responsibility for that too. So
Mhm.
it's not a slight against them. They've taken their due diligence
Absolutely.
to figure that out. So
Yeah.
I of course wrapped that gift up of being some of the only um, children of God on the earth. I wrapped that up with feeling very obligated to go into the work. So I
Mhm.
started thinking about the work constantly by age, I think it was around 12. I professed at
Wow.
11,
Yeah.
and around 12 it just entered my mind, and it was there. So I filtered everything through the work. So
Mhm.
I didn't, of course, we all, my sisters and I, were not ones to be able to enter in at school because we were so different from everybody with our
Mhm.
appearance and what we didn't know, like music and so on. But
Mhm.
also with professing kids, I also held back because I didn't know. It was very awkward. I didn't know
Mhm.
where I stood. I was way too serious, and
Mhm.
just couldn't let go of
Mhm.
um, needing to act perfect. I
Right,
didn't.
right.
I'd have nightmares that something had happened that would make me unclean, so I wouldn't be accepted in the work if it indeed was
Oh,
God's
wow.
will. Um,
Mhm.
and I remember those clearly to this day. Waking up thinking like,
Mhm.
and so if you're not being if you're not handling yourself well, and then you ruin yourself and God can't take you into the work, then you're sent to hell, right? Because
Oh,
you
wow,
you
yeah.
have ruined your calling, and that's your fault.
Mm.
So I just
Mhm.
was very, very concerned with being responsible with my life. So when I was baptized
Mhm.
at age 15, that was a double vow. Like, I vowed to God, like, I'm dying to you. And also, here's my life. If you need it for the work, it's yours. If not, please tell me, but I don't know. I'm so confused and unsure that I'm just
Mhm.
gonna not do anything and save myself for that. So that
Mhm.
was my baptism
Mhm.
experience. And it's not like I was wanting to go into the work necessarily. Like, it was a very daunting thing. I was extremely shy. I let my
Mhm.
twin sister do all the talking and just sort of
Yeah.
did. But it was something that I knew I needed to do. Like, who wouldn't be called to the work if the whole world is destined for darkness? So that was my
Right.
confusion. Like, shouldn't everybody be called to the work if we know this thing? And yet, how do I
Mhm.
know that I'm called? Total
Mhm.
obsession, just completely, almost OCD about it. So
Right.
anyway, excruciating confusion. It very much
Mhm.
paralyzed me from even knowing what to say. So
Yeah,
I'd beg to
sure.
God to make it clear to me. I'd pull over, like, I'd be driving home from work as a teenager, like, after school, go to work on my
Mhm.
way home, and I'd pull over and just look up at the sky and beg God, just give me just a glimpse of an idea to know. Like, I don't know.
Mhm.
Do I start thinking about college or not? I felt like I just had to know. So
Mhm.
I never said a word to anybody about it. And finally, I settled at age 19. I settled it that the need was the cry. I just decided, like, the overseers
Okay.
would say that all the time, the need of the harvest field. And it made sense to me. I
Mhm.
guess I'm feeling that there's a need. And so that's my call, is the need.
I see, yeah.
So that's how I settled it. And anyway, throughout my teenage years, I'd hide in the, like, it's so silly looking back, but I'd hide in our bathroom and kind of sneak meeting notes and poems workers had written and just tried to figure out what this was. Like, what should I be learning? I was trying to prepare. I'd read my Bible, of
Mhm.
course, morning and night and pray, but I felt like
Mhm.
I needed to really understand what I was going to be sharing. And I felt like I
Mhm.
kind of got it and kind of didn't. So I,
Mhm.
of course, I was very private. I didn't want anybody to have any hint that I was thinking about the work. So I'd kind of hide
Right.
trying to figure it out and learn as much as I
Mhm.
could. So, like in gospel meetings, I'd sit there and just listen to every single word, wanting to know what they were saying. Like, I need to
Mhm.
understand this. So,
Mhm.
that was my teenagehood. So, I offered at 19 and I went just a couple of weeks later. I had thought
Oh.
I'd wait, a year or so. I knew I was young, but
Mhm.
I just knew I needed to get it off my chest. So, I
Right.
wrote a letter, got a letter back. Actually, yeah, I got a letter back saying it'll be a while. So then our
Mhm.
family took a vacation. And anyway, the overseer called my parents' cell
Mhm.
phone and said, "Can you be in South Carolina in 1 week?" So I did that. And
Mhm.
that was, um, of course, it was a time of grief. We were close,
Mhm.
and my
Mhm.
family and I, and it was relief, um, fear, just everything, of course.
Yeah.
I was a kid. So the friends in
Mhm.
South Carolina were absolutely incredible. I to this day, when I think about them, I feel warmth and connection. I love them
Mhm.
dearly. They helped raise me.
Mhm.
So, as a child, they
Yeah.
accepted me. I remember in gospel meetings saying, "You should be teaching me. I'm so young and you've lived so much
Mhm.
more. You've lived much longer than I have. But here we are."
Mhm.
I'd beg God
Mhm.
before each meeting, like, "Please let me hide behind you so that you can speak."
Mm.
So
Mhm.
my coworker, she wanted to keep me busy, as a hyperactive farm
Mhm.
kid. So she
Mhm.
planned for like 3 gospel meetings a week, and the field was
Oh,
pretty
wow.
small. So those friends, they ran their tires off.
Oh,
They did a
wow.
lot of listening. So, oh my. But
Oh.
anyway, we did too much teaching before we could put in enough learning. I didn't know and I knew
Mhm.
I didn't, but I loved
Mhm.
God. I knew that. And I loved
Mhm.
the friends, and they embraced me in a warm hug. And so we just did life. But it was soon after that, unfortunately, and this is what's so hard to say, but soon after
Mm.
that, I felt like there was something really wrong.
Mhm.
I mean, just maybe a couple months into the
Okay.
work. I was in the work for 10 years. But so,
Mhm.
you know, there were things that I was surprised at. Maybe the lack of things to do. I wasn't expecting that. My whole life I'd wanted to be worn out for God, just completely
Mm.
nothing left. I gladly would
Mhm.
have died of anything for him. And I think it's because in my mind, I could never picture there being a purpose to life. Why would you have a family only to die a few decades later and leave
Mhm.
them and have
Mm.
grief? And why would
Mhm.
you work hard to make money when that's not what matters? We'd heard that our whole lives, the vanity of living.
Right.
So that struck me, and I thought, if I'm in the work, I can just focus on being an empty vessel, like we heard,
Mhm.
and that will be. And I sincerely was thankful for that. I thank the friends
Mhm.
and God so often, like, thank you, friends, for working so that I can focus on spiritual matters. So that was a big bucket filler for me. So even though
Mhm.
my body was idle, and that was very, very hard for me. That was probably the hardest thing for me. I loved the friends, it was fine.
Mhm.
I slowly figured out how to talk, and anyway.
Mhm.
But the idleness of body, I didn't recognize it then, but it caused a pretty deep depression.
Okay, yeah.
The nothingness, like getting up in the morning and knowing, there's nothing to do today. There's no
Mhm.
meal to plan for. There's no chore to do. There's no bill to pay. There's no class to take. Nothing.
Mhm. Mhm.
I can't take the car. Of course, I didn't have a phone. I didn't have internet. I didn't have a computer, nothing.
Right.
So
Mhm.
that is really bad for homesickness to have a day of nothing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I had gone to Central America for half a year before that. So I knew what homesickness was. And I was going into it, I
Mhm.
was thankful I would know that. I remember saying, like, I know I can't blame the work for being homesick. I'm just simply growing up. So I understood that, but it
Mhm.
still was hard.
Mhm.
Um,
Right.
so anyway, was, I was disappointed or embarrassed at feeling like my life was spent in living rooms. And
Mhm.
I'd apologize to God, like, God, I'm so sorry. I feel like I'm wasting the strength of my 20s. Like I'm not
Mhm.
using my strength. I have so much I want to give,
Mhm.
and it's trapped inside of me and I can't.
Mhm.
And so I felt
Mhm.
bad. I'd apologize to God for that. And so I'd
Right.
beg him, like I will do your work. So please use
Mhm.
me, like whatever you need to do. I feel like
Mhm.
I'm not doing what I should be. So it was kind of
Mhm.
like a stalemate, like there,
Mhm.
all this climax to be in the work and then nothing. So I
Right.
remember my companion saying, like, I don't understand. Like nobody stays in the work anymore. The kids leave, you know. I said, well, I do
Mhm.
understand. I do. It's amazing
Mhm.
to go from you're juggling like college and school and work and homework and then
Mhm.
nothing. There's nothing.
Mhm.
So
Right.
anyway, I'm
Right.
not sure if she knew where I was coming from or not, but I think
Mhm.
the concept in the work, of just it's your life you're giving. It's more about the life you're giving than what you're doing. So
Mhm.
if you are in the work, then you're for fulfilling God's entire calling.
Mhm.
That is completely the focus rather than what are the needs and how are we meeting them and what do we understand and what can we share in our people? How do we reach them? There's no
Right.
problem solving like that. So it's more
Mhm.
I am a worker.
Mhm. And that in and of itself is the calling and the full completion of the sacrifice is kinda
Yeah,
how you
then
feel.
you're
Yeah.
right. You're safe and right.
Mhm.
It is what
Yeah.
it is. So
Yeah. Did you stay in
I
South
ran
Carolina for a while then?
so I was there for 2 years and
Mhm.
then I was moved to Florida and that was um unexpected. I didn't expect that.
Mhm.
And of course I loved those friends too. And the
Mhm.
friends were such a source of fellowship for me. Um
Mm.
I there's no words to describe how much I love them. I think of
Yeah.
them often and when we moved back here I missed them just as much. I was just as homesick for them as when I left
Mm.
Wisconsin and went south. So
Mhm.
anyway, so yeah, I was in Florida for 8 years. And that was, I continued to grow up there. I would have been 20, I guess, 21. I don't really want to get into that too much. It's a little bit too
Mhm.
personal. Um,
Mhm.
it was good and it was hard and um
Yeah.
a lot of the stories are a little bit too personal for
Mhm.
I don't want to cause hurt. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Completely respect that.
yeah.
Yeah,
But like
absolutely.
in the work, there was just the general situation. Like, of course, I needed to take walks or runs. I liked to run. That was a good way to get some of my energy out.
Mhm.
So one time I got gauchos, like those wide pants. I thought I'd
Mhm.
do that instead of a skirt because when you run in a skirt, people are always stopping. Are you okay? Like, what's wrong?
Oh, sure.
So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
anyway, that's
Mhm.
just a side note. But I was stopped from
Mhm.
doing that. That was
Mhm.
so you're in the work. There's a lot about reality that doesn't touch you. You're very removed from
Mhm.
it. So
Mhm.
anyway, I remember I got a shirt then that said run, RUN in big capital letters. So I'd run with
Mhm.
that. And that helped
Mhm.
because I was
Yeah.
running in my skirt. So if I said
Yeah.
run, then people would let me be. So I wouldn't have to,
Mhm.
have all of the unwanted
Mhm.
attention. So that was kind of
Mhm.
interesting. One time I was going to go camping and with my family was visiting. So I went
Mhm.
we were going straight to the campsite, so I had my sweatpants on. Again, I was told to change. Things like that
Mhm.
sound little and
Mhm.
insignificant, and yet those little instances and many more are why there's such a huge division between the workers and the friends now. And the
Mm.
divide is growing wider. And it's because, so I remember watching the friends slowly try to change, not all of them, but some of them were loosening a little bit and,
Mhm. Mhm.
asking, so why do we have to wear skirts? Like, such, who wants to even waste brain cells talking about that when there's,
Mhm.
awesome spiritual matters that you could dive into? But anyway, so they
Right.
were starting to ask. And
Mhm.
so then I was in a place where, what do you say? It goes against your coworker. And yet I completely didn't know why. Um, and I
Mhm.
always understood modesty to be mainly of the heart, and your
Mhm.
humility. And I knew
Mhm.
God loved modesty, but in a much deeper way and more meaningful way. So anyway,
Mhm.
that all was kind of tricky. My hair doesn't grow much, and in the
Mhm.
buns it would break off. And so
Mhm.
one time I trimmed it to get all the split ends off, and my companion
Mhm.
really panicked. She really was scared for me.
Mhm.
And that helped me realize,
Mhm.
like, this is real. They don't mean anything by it. They're not trying to just be bullies, but they sincerely believe in what they believe in. And that was an aha moment for me where I realized, like, I actually am more different from them than what I realize. And
Okay,
that was
yeah.
a really solemn moment for me. And again, I don't mean to be
Of course,
presumptuous or
yeah.
sound proud, but
Mhm.
it was something I had never imagined, because my only goal in life was to, fit in, be on scene, be used. And yet
Mhm.
this divide started happening. So,
Mhm.
and of course, as time goes on and more years you face of the same cycle, like the gospel meeting, the friends attending, the many visits at dinner tables. Again, none of this was bad, at all,
Mhm.
but it was too much of the same thing and not enough work. And I remember
Mhm.
just feeling embarrassed, like, you know, I remember thinking, wow, especially on special meeting rounds, I was picturing everybody who was serving me and I wasn't even
Mhm.
there yet. People like getting beds ready,
Mhm.
making food, they're all serving me, and all I wanted to do was help. But I knew, like, wow, I am being served. Like, you can really, really get pretty high and mighty in the work and be important and,
Mhm.
you know, be on people's minds. And it was embarrassing to me. So,
Mm. Mhm.
um,
Because every reason you went in the work was to serve and to work,
right.
do the
Yeah.
Lord's work, yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it was, I was just craving doing the Lord's work and wanting to,
Mhm.
and yet I didn't hardly even know what you could ever change. And so
Mhm.
when you enter the work, of course, it's of the thought you're called. So you're not just going to randomly exit one day and go do something else. So
Okay,
it,
yeah.
it never occurred to me that I could leave the work. It never ever occurred to me. It was never a thought.
Mhm.
Um, I just decided. So the more time that passed, as I looked to the future, it looked
Mhm.
like a big black hole, just
Okay.
black and a hole, and just the future just looked like nothing. And I remember
Mhm.
thinking, how can I do nothing for my whole life? I don't know
Right.
how. I don't know if I can. And yet I
Mhm.
have to. So that was
Mhm.
my existence for quite a while. I say that
Mhm.
with a side also of lightness, like I've
Yeah.
always loved God and I
Mhm.
love the friends. So it's not one thing or the other, but this
Yes,
one side does need to be talked about. So,
exactly.
that darkness was there. And so this is
Mhm.
kind of where Kevin comes in. This,
Mhm.
years passed and I'd been in Florida for long enough. I loved Florida. I mean, there was the
Yeah.
culture there, the differences, much more there were variables, melting pot of everything,
Mhm.
and so
Mhm.
it wasn't quite so what you would expect to be your
Mhm.
average professing experience. So
Mhm.
because of that, um, there was quite a bit of judgment toward the friends from the workers, and
Mm.
that broke
Mhm.
my heart because I knew how sincere they were. It didn't matter if their hair was short or if
Mhm.
they had giant TVs or if they worked different kinds of jobs, or if they had different things in their glasses that had bubbles in them. It
Yeah.
didn't matter, but it did
Right.
matter. And those friends paid for it. Just things that, like I remember saying so often, they're this way for a reason, they're so
Mhm.
sincere. They're just like any. So Kevin came a few years after I did to Florida, and
Mhm.
and we I started seeing in him a an acceptance of
Mhm.
the friends, like just a basic acceptance and love, not questioning, not
Mhm.
measuring. He was just
Mhm.
there for the same reason I was. And this is where
Right.
it gets tricky because I don't want to sound
Yeah, of course.
anyway. But so we started talking, we'd start talking about these friends to the workers, and it just brought us together. And
Mhm.
we started going to funerals together. We were sent
Mhm.
together for that. It was just this thing that kept growing. And I remember
Yeah.
looking at it from a distance. I felt like I was looking at my life, like what is happening? And
Right.
we became really good friends. And it never occurred
Mhm.
to us, of course, that anything beyond that would happen. But a few more years
Mhm.
passed, and I remember having this thought that came into my mind suddenly, like pretty soon I'll probably leave Florida and I'm gonna
Okay.
miss him. So
Mhm.
that was my first inkling that maybe something was either really wrong or really right or
Mhm.
anything in between. So
Mhm.
anyway, we didn't a lot of this story I'm not going to share just because it is
Of
very dear to
course.
my heart and it's very special to me.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
don't want to put it out there because I
Of
would like to
course.
guard it.
Yeah.
But it was all great. There was nothing
Mhm.
weird about it. But one thing about leaving the work, we left the work at the same time. That's very
Mhm.
humiliating. So you just feel like
Wow, yeah.
you're very exposed. And
Mhm.
we were tired. Both of us were tired with the rules. We were weary with mistaken
Mhm.
teachings. It felt wrong to be fighting against things so much, and yet
Mhm.
to love something so much. And I remember telling my sisters knew a lot of what was going on down
Mhm.
there. And I remember telling them, like, I never pictured being in the work as like living in the gutter, just a lot of backstabbing and gossiping and just stuff I'd never been
Mhm.
around before. It was new to me,
Mhm.
brand new. Anyway,
Mhm.
we didn't have the guidance that we should have for how you would live as a unit, as a commune
Yeah.
almost.
Mhm.
There's lots of jealousy, and
Yeah.
that's there's no way around it.
Yeah.
So
To be
you're replaced.
expected.
You give everything to a field and then you leave. You're replaced. You're a nobody.
Mhm.
You're supposed to be a nobody,
Mhm.
so that should be fine. That hurts. And so
Right.
there starts to, everybody's kind of vying to not be replaced. And
Mhm.
anyway, that could be argued, I suppose, but it's just human behavior. It's basic human needs,
Mhm.
like you
Exactly.
have to have when you detach constantly, you're going to get a disorder at some point. You're going to detach in
Mhm.
some way or not, or you're going to get some
Mhm.
coping mechanisms that aren't great, or you're,
Right.
as we've seen the abuse. I mean,
Exactly.
so you're there one minute, gone the next. Who's going to hold you accountable? So for every single measure of human on the entire scale, there's a lot of wiggle room to be a nobody in a good way or a bad way. And none of
Mhm.
that is very healthy in any way, no
Right.
matter your motive. So it's
Mhm.
traumatized people aren't healthy.
Yes.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so we decided after a long while that we would leave the work. We decided we weren't living honestly in our beliefs. And
Mhm.
so we had talked about, and we loved each other. We had discovered that. And
Mhm.
so we had talked to our overseer, like, could we be a married couple? And they're like, no, like that's not, you can't
Mhm.
do that. So that's
Mhm.
not possible. It'd take away from the work
Okay.
and it
I
would
see, yeah.
confuse other workers and it confused the friends. And we kind of knew
Mhm.
that would be our answer, but yet I think just to clear our consciences toward God, like that's where we were at
Sure.
that
Sure,
stage.
yeah.
We were still very much in the, are we called to this? How do we leave it? This is
Yeah.
scary, but we can't
Yeah.
stay. We don't really know. So
Yeah.
lots of
Mhm.
tug and pull, and yet wanting God to be the center. That was always our ultimate.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
um, trying to think where to go from here. We grieved so heavily before leaving, after leaving. Um, we we loved what the work meant to us, like the idea of what the work was, like what I thought the work should be. I grieved that not existing. So I had offered for something that was not there. I never found it.
Right.
I begged for it and I never found it.
Mhm.
I thought it was
Mhm.
there and it was not. And I will say that
Mhm.
boldly, it wasn't. So
Mhm.
um after we left, we had no idea who we were, like outside of the work. I'd never,
Yeah.
from age 12, that was my only, so it felt
Mhm.
very like I felt like I was exposed. Like
Mhm.
I had never allowed myself to be a person. And so to all of a sudden
Mhm.
allow myself this feeling even towards somebody, it felt like such a huge sin and embarrassing and
Mhm.
humiliating. I had a lot of growing to
Mhm.
do. So
Mhm.
it was about 3 years of really intense grief and desolation and shame. Leaving
Mhm.
together was pretty humiliating. We had
Mhm.
both put our whole lives into the work. It felt foreign to even think about caring for someone else, let alone yourself. So
Mhm.
a
Mhm.
new feeling to just be somebody, rather than being that
Right.
empty vessel. So, and also
Right.
emotions and spiritual confusion aside, it's really, really scary to leave the work. It's so scary. And that's the reason why I likely would never have if I wouldn't have met Kevin. And I say that with a grain of salt because I do trust God, but I don't know how I would have.
Mhm. Mhm.
I like to think I have some courage, but it's scary. So you
Mhm.
don't have any money, you don't have a footprint on the earth. You've failed miserably your calling. There's
Right.
no retirement to be had. You look to the future. How would you possibly even start? You
Mhm.
don't know how. You hardly know what the word taxes are. You can't rent
Mhm.
an apartment because you don't have any credit. You don't have any
Right.
history. So,
Mhm.
and many workers will never be able to retire. I mean, it's just a
Mhm.
fact. If you think about it, it's
Mhm.
impossible. And there's no way to
Yeah.
fix it. You can't undo. It's one thing to not work for 1 year or five, but like a decade or two, you can't catch up. And so I
Yeah.
think that's one very large reason why there's not a lot of outreach toward workers. I think that has changed recently,
Mhm.
thankfully,
Mhm.
but historically there hasn't been a lot because for one thing it looks like this impossible mountain. Like how do you help that? That's kind of
Yeah.
unhelpful. And
Mhm.
also because it's conflicting. So if these people were supposed to be doing the will of God called them into the work. If I help them, is that sin? Probably.
Right.
Like I'm helping
Yeah.
them sin because they're not doing the will of God, so I better not help them. So it's this
Mhm.
double, you know this double, like, back up a minute. So it's
Mhm.
conflicting.
Mhm.
To go against your calling is not something that anybody, has ever suggested. So when you think it's your
Mhm.
calling, anyway. So we
Mhm.
considered disappearing. Um, where are we going to go? We strongly considered going out west and working on like farms and ranches because then you'd have housing and you
Yeah.
would be nowhere. No one could find you. Um,
Mhm.
but that didn't feel right because I didn't want to lose my family and
Yeah.
speaking for myself.
Mhm.
So I knew like if I suddenly left the work, they wouldn't know me. They would not know who I was. They wouldn't know anything about me. So we decided we'll move back home to Wisconsin and we'll live
Mhm.
right with my family. And
Mhm.
um and then I can live my love to God and let my
Mhm.
family know like I am still me. I might be confusing to
Mhm.
everybody, but I'm still who I am. Like I'm not
Yeah.
anything other than the same. And
Exactly.
that's confusing. But at least if you're
Mhm.
there and you're living, I didn't really know how much I needed them. So I'm really glad that I thought I was going to go
Mhm.
help them know that I was okay.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
moved back there. Kevin went. by his family for a while, which is on
Mhm.
the eastern side of Wisconsin. I was on the western side, and we were making everything as hard as possible. We were trying to, punish ourselves. So,
Yeah.
pay for our failures. So anyway, so I got through those first months. It was,
Mhm.
a lot of sobbing and feeling
Mhm.
lost and really scared. And I remember
Mhm.
eating toothpaste and just being so scared. Like, how do I buy this? I don't know how I'm going to afford
Mhm.
toothpaste. Um,
Mhm.
and wondering, trying to figure out how I fit in with my family again. Um,
Mhm.
so we married 10 months after that. We had promised each other in that time, like, if you feel like you need to go back into work, please do not let me stop you. Do not let me stop you.
Mhm.
So we vowed to each other
Mhm.
that if either of us felt that way, we would
Mhm.
do that. We got a lot of we got a lot of support, and we got a lot of hate mail. So a lot of
Mhm.
barn burners, like Kevin has called them. He's showed me some of them, some of the emails recently that he didn't show me at first. And it's just sad. But again, the workers especially are very misguided in understanding what the calling is. So
Mhm. I'm so
Kevin
sorry.
was dealt with pretty harshly, feeling like he took me out of the work. That was not the case. Um,
Mhm.
and we got through it. You understand where they're coming from. I remember telling Kevin before we left, we have to understand the misunderstanding.
Mm.
We've been there. We've watched people leave. We've watched them get married. We know the feelings of like, how could you possibly do that? So we have to
Mhm.
understand that. And that helped us a
Mhm.
lot, just to
Mhm.
know, we've been there. Um,
Yeah.
and that transferred over 8 years after that when we ultimately stopped
Yeah.
going to meeting. That helped us a lot. So I will
Yeah.
say leaving the work was immeasurably more grueling than leaving the meetings. And part of it is because it was a progression. And part of it is
Mhm.
because leaving the work was a death. It was a death to somebody,
Mhm.
and you have to start over. And
Mhm.
leaving the meetings was more of a life. It was like
Okay.
leaving something because there's something.
Oh,
So
wow.
um
Yeah.
so anyway, you feel like a fraud when the work has been your entire identity.
Mhm.
You try to find yourself, and you just feel like a fraud, even to your own self. So that takes a
Mhm.
while to build back up. And you can't explain that to someone. It's too much. So you just kind of
Mhm.
put one foot in front of
Mhm.
the other. My
Right.
my sisters were really my siblings were so sweet. I remember accidentally finding out that one of my sisters had told some of the women in our area, like, be gentle with Kayla. She's been through
Mhm.
some things. And that was a lifeline to me, an anchor to know, even though
Yeah.
they don't understand, they're not judging me like I thought they should.
Yeah.
I was judging
Yeah.
myself. So to have
Mhm.
that kindness was an anchor for sure, an absolute
Yeah.
anchor. So it's the little things like that that matter so
Mhm.
much for anybody leaving anything, trying to grow, to let them know, like, we want to handle you carefully. This is a
Yeah.
lot for you, and you're doing your best. You're doing great.
Mhm.
That's so helpful.
Mhm.
Anyway, so in the 8 years after we left the work and left, we were, you know, hosting workers. We found ourselves a home and did a lot of night school and day working and catching up, and
Mm.
had some kids, adopted some kids. We we lived a
Yeah.
lot in a
Wow.
little bit of time.
Mhm.
But in those times, the workers would come. We love them to death, but we would probably harass them with questions. I'd ask before they came, like, to Kevin, like, okay, we really need to talk about, like, this or this or this. So
Mhm.
anyone who came, they probably knew, like, okay, get ready, because they're going to have the conversation after supper. So
Uh-huh.
anyway, we did that, lots of visits, and I feel like we had a fine relationship with the workers. It can be awkward sometimes, but
Mhm.
overall it was fine. And I felt hopeful in some ways. But so usually the response at some point in the visit would be like, these things don't change quickly. It takes time.
Mhm.
So when many of those things were exposed a couple of years ago, I assumed, okay, the time has come. This is good. It's
Yeah.
really sad. And I feel like the CSA is way too much to even get into right now,
Yeah.
but it's good. Finally, things are going to start making sense, and people
Mhm.
are going to be safer, and we're not going to be doing these divisions, and we're not going to be telling people to be quiet in meetings if they're divorced, just
Mhm.
things like that.
Mhm.
Finally,
Mhm.
we're not going to be wasting our breath wondering about little rules, and
Yes.
we're going to start loving our Christian neighbors. Yes, like this is
Mhm.
good. But
Mhm.
when the hatches were buttoned down, and it was the opposite of what we
Mhm.
thought it would be, we knew
Mhm.
deep down like the change had never been the goal. Changing had never been the goal.
Right.
So I felt betrayed. Like I had been led on to believe that others also found many things to be more damaging than worthwhile. So
Mhm.
that, once I realized that many were satisfied and had never questioned, I knew I didn't belong.
Mhm.
So it began to
Right.
feel almost like abuse, like I was abusing others, going to meeting, like speaking things that were on my mind boldly, like, oh no, they wanted what
Mhm.
they had. So who am I to
Mhm.
bully my way in and change that? So when we
Mm.
realized that
Mhm.
many do believe in the things that we don't believe in, we knew that we needed to leave. So that was kind of our
Right.
so, and the flip side was our kids were getting a little older. They were starting to ask questions about things they heard in meeting. And I'll never forget
Yeah.
trying to explain to the kids they had heard a message in gospel meeting that day about the workers being the only biblical ministry, and that like they
You're right.
fulfill part of Matthew 5. So that's why they're the only
Mhm.
right ones. And so trying to amend
Mhm.
that message afterward, I just felt embarrassed before God, like I was living a double life in the eyes of God. So
Mhm.
my inner beliefs and my outward show were two separate dwellings. And that
Mhm.
can't go on forever. It can go on,
Mhm.
when you think we're going to work on it, but if
Right.
you think, okay, now we have to settle in and this is what it
Mhm.
is, suddenly that's a different story.
It
And
is,
God
yeah.
is faithful. So
Mhm.
that has been our experience, and I know it's been everybody's.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
we don't need to go over many of the details why we
Yeah.
left. I know that's
Yeah.
broadly talked about. There's lots of stories and
Mhm.
journeys that are available to us, and to those, I would say me too. But I am
Yeah.
relatively passionate about guarding our freedom to believe and grow, our freedom to be
Yeah.
wrong. We've been
Mhm.
wrong, and it's okay,
Yeah.
but we can
And it's
feel free
okay.
to be wrong, and we
Uh-huh.
can express trust, like we can trust God and let go of some things and leave
Mhm.
more room for God, so in his will.
Mhm.
But leaving is still
Mhm.
hard. It's a free fall. That's how I would describe it. When you
Yeah.
step out of that safety, you're free falling. You don't have
Mhm.
what
Mhm.
the security that you once did. So it's
Yes.
letting go of everything and telling God, like,
Mm.
okay, it's up to you. I trust you. And if we can tell God, I trust you,
Mhm.
then all of a sudden he has a lot he can do. And that's why the floodgates
Yeah.
open up. So
Yeah.
trusting him alone gives us every gift we've ever sought for. And suddenly it's not so much about what can I give you, God? Like, here, take me and use me. It's,
Right.
oh, wow, whoa, and you're trying to
Mhm.
absorb it all, and all of a sudden the world turns from darkness to light, and
Right.
your burdens are gone, and God
Uh-huh.
leads us. So um my first prayer to God after we had made our dividing point, where we had said we're not coming back to meeting for now, and we're gonna
Mhm.
figure this out. My first prayer to God after that, after leaving the umbrella of professing,
Mhm.
I'll never forget it. It was unexpected and really special. It was like
Mhm.
meeting with God for the first time without a veil
Oh,
of man.
wow.
So,
Yeah.
and like I couldn't hide behind being professing anymore. I
Mhm.
didn't have anything to
Mhm.
protect me. So, and God has taken a special interest in all of us these days. He's
Mhm.
he's worked in ways that are unmistakable. So,
Mhm.
and not that the meetings are the ultimate thing that God is focused on. We're just one of many. And yet
One of many.
I feel like he has decided that now is a really good time to collectively work with. How special is that to suddenly get to grow with a lot
Mhm.
of people at the same time and
Mhm.
understand each other and have
Mhm.
fellowship with that. So he's taken a
Yeah.
special interest in that, and he wants unlimited access to us without the limitations of man. So without labels, without
Yeah.
divisions, there's no
Mhm.
way to have hierarchy um,
Mhm.
when you're leaving the labels. So
Yeah. I love
so
that.
I started asking one thing that I did that last summer was 2 summers ago, um, when we were deciding what do we do? Do we stay? Do we go? This is hard.
Mhm.
Um, I started asking neighbors and friends and just anybody I could think of, specifically in our area, um,
Mhm.
if I could go on a walk with them or ask them some questions. So I'd ask them about, like,
Mhm.
what does the Bible mean to you? How what does it look like when you pray? And who is God to you? What does
Mhm.
the truth mean to you? And
Mm.
oh my, I was so shocked. I was so humbled. I felt so foolish.
Wow.
So it was
Yeah.
also like an immediate warm hug of life and love. I
Mhm.
didn't know that God was everywhere. I had no idea. So I learned more in that summer than I could possibly hold, and made
Mhm.
you know, some really special friendships that I didn't know existed
Mhm.
immediately around me, my neighbors.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the life, like, from God surrounds us. I look at the
Yeah.
Douglas firs surrounding our house and I see God, and I
Mhm.
am amazed at him, and
Mhm.
the way that he can remind us of him when we've gone through something that gives us so much doubt. So
Yeah.
when the system fails that is God to you, suddenly there's no God, but he's there
Yes.
still. And it's
Mhm.
in obvious ways that we've been taught to disregard, like, oh no, that's natural. So that was the
Yes.
long lesson for me, starting as a young person, thinking like life is vain. Why would I put anything into it? Um,
Mhm.
what I do, what's that? To
Mhm.
to try to leave that and realize everything has meaning. Everything is divine. Everything is from
Yes.
God, and we can completely glory in it. We can find
Mhm.
blessing in it, even in the shadow
Mhm.
of the tree, let alone the greatness of it. Um,
Right.
so it's peace surrounds us. That's been my foundation as I've tried to find my way. So
Mhm.
to start counting blessings, we can understand God better, when we're able to do that,
Mhm.
and then thank Him for them.
Mhm.
So finally, we
Mhm.
can love him without the painful questions that always lurked, like, why is everyone lost?
Yes.
So heaven will contain and already does innumerable souls. So to be able to read
Mhm.
that and believe it is
Uh-huh.
really fun. That's really fun.
Yeah.
So I finally can feel like I love God without being hurt by him.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
anyway, so that was that summer. And that was also the summer I started seeing the value in being able to dive into resources without feeling afraid, learning
Mhm.
how to reason and use discretion, and learn about,
Mhm.
like, the history of the Bible and not feel afraid, and learn about the
Mhm.
culture of it, and just bring in tools. We paid for a
Mhm.
few books that summer. Anyway, we
Yeah.
have them now. So
Yeah.
the thing that struck me, we started going to some churches, just visited different ones, and
Mhm.
again, that was Kevin and I had made a list, like, what have we been taught, and is it true
Mhm.
or false? We have to search out everything. So we did
Mhm.
that, like, we were checking off the list, and so on the list was churches. Is it true or false that they're wrong and evil and corrupt? And so we started
Mhm.
finding out, and we still go. We've found great help
Mhm.
with them. One thing
Mhm.
that was humbling and a relief for me was, so I was so fearful of the chaos of churches, like going in and
Mhm.
hearing the loud music, and that
Mhm.
that scared me. I thought that I would love to just run away and never come
Yeah.
back. But the more I asked about, like, how do you prepare your messages, and
Mm.
um, what does that look like, and like, do you pray for it, or like, how do you feel
Mhm.
about the notes when you're, delivering your message? It struck me how reverently we can handle the Bible. So
Mhm.
I viewed reverence as quietness, sitting quietly
Mhm.
and having your Bible open, and, just the reverence of that. And I love it. I always will.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
the reverence of being careful with the Bible is
Right.
is very respectful. So
Right.
being able to make sure beforehand, like, what I say is sound and it lines up with
Mhm.
scripture. And I'm going to
Mhm.
review what I'm going to teach with others, like the elders of the
Mhm.
church, and they can have input and they can tell me if they think this isn't clear, or if it
Mhm.
doesn't line up with scripture, and we can look at history and make sure that we're not putting this
Mhm.
on to ourselves in a way that's
Mhm.
not accurate. So anyway, all of
That
that is such reverence. I'm so thankful to have learned how to better revere the Bible rather than just using it as a
Mhm.
tool to prove myself or to try to
Right.
somehow understand it without
Mhm.
using it correctly. So anyway, that's kind of a side note, but that
Mhm.
has helped me quite a bit in stepping out into a culture that's so shocking to us that,
Right.
we're not
Yes.
used to. It feels like it's just too much, and we'd like to
Yes.
just not do anything, but really to
Mhm.
consider the reverence of giving something a chance and really understanding it opens up a lot of um, opportunity to grow,
I
um,
love that.
even
That's so
culturally. So,
that's so
and we love
incredible.
the way, leaving it
Yeah.
is something that it's not like we were looking for a way out by any
Right.
means. So
Right.
I feel like sometimes when we've heard people have left or have chosen something differently, it's that, of course, they were bitter or they weren't
Mhm.
willing, and that is
Mhm.
so false. So,
Right.
the fellowship, the hymns, the extended
Mhm.
family, like we've heard of, a group like this, what's one of the biggest drawing points? It's an immediate family. Who doesn't want that? So,
Right.
um,
Yeah.
the network, and then being tucked away safely, away from all the danger of the world. And so we didn't
Mhm.
leave it because we hated it. There's sacrifice in leaving. You have to let things go
Mhm.
that you love.
Yes.
That's something that
Yes.
we have to consider. Like, it just because we love it doesn't mean, like I was saying earlier, just because someone means well doesn't mean you follow them. Just because
Right.
it's good for you in some ways doesn't mean that it's the will of God, or that it's, a
Mhm.
full-bodied um, story.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
much like leaving the work, you can love something that's broken, of course,
Yeah.
and you can be
Yeah.
bonded to it. And we
Mhm.
can talk about ways that it's broken, and that's okay. And we don't have to hate it, but we can still talk about it. So,
Right.
so I wrote down some things. I know I've been referencing, like, the issues, and I might just spin through it real
Mhm.
quick. Some of,
Perfect.
like, those things that we view as
Mhm.
non-negotiables.
Mhm.
Basically, bluntly, it's the issues that I'd like to just make mention to. So one of
Mhm.
them is that conflict is pretty largely avoided. It's often viewed as
Mhm.
offense or disobedience.
Mhm.
Another is that statement of, I'm doing the Lord's will. And that's overstated. If if we can say we're doing the Lord's will, we need to have scripture to back it up.
Mhm.
So that statement isn't enough. But I feel like that's been a thought stopping statement that has been overused.
Yeah.
Another one is exclusivity, of course. That's something
Mhm.
that we shouldn't be able to live with. And then another is
Mhm.
the non-disclosure of the history. That's a problem. That's
Yep.
that's lying. Just telling my daughter the other day, like, I'd asked her if she did her chores, and she said she did. So I said
Mhm.
specifically, did you feed the pigs? Oh no, I didn't. Well,
Mhm.
that's lying. You're allowing me to
Mhm.
believe something that I'm mistaking it. So that's not
Mhm.
telling the truth when you let somebody believe something that's false. So,
Right.
and then, of course, um, this is the hard one, but the work. letting people be called to the work and enter it, and then 10 or so years down the road, be left. To me, this is a strong word, but to me, it's child trafficking, taking a life and then using it and not letting it be free and
Mhm.
damaging it and trapping it.
Mhm.
And then when it's done, it's done. So
Right.
that's really sad. And often
Mhm.
people will say, well, you chose it. You chose it. And that is very, very untrue. So
Mhm.
I don't think that at all. I think that it's very much conditioning. And
Mhm.
if you put it all together, there's the need, the world is lost, you have the only solution.
Mhm.
No, no, no. It's not a choice. You're
Right.
coerced into it. So,
Right.
um,
Yes.
and then another problem is the division of families. That's really sad and really
Mhm.
devastating. And we
Mhm.
all have lived it. So,
Mhm.
division of families, specifically, if you choose a different way, they don't know you anymore. That's very sad. They could.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and then, of course, another one is the division of treatment and beliefs within the structure, like the beliefs within the entire structure, like
Mhm.
Trinity, holidays, divorce, is an endless list.
Mhm.
There's lots
Mhm.
of division there. And
Mhm.
because nothing is written down, so there's no accountability.
Mhm.
So that's a problem.
Mhm.
That's not a
Mhm.
strong point. It's not a spiritual gift. So writing something down is not a spiritual, it's okay. It's okay to be accountable. And
Mhm.
another is no tangible teaching. It's
Yeah.
it's a lot of shadows and speak that can morph into whatever it needs to, and
Yep.
just, yeah. And then
Yep.
another problem is that the elders aren't included in decisions, and that's the complete
Mhm.
opposite is what was taught in Acts 15.
Mhm.
It lays it out so beautifully how that could work, and
Yeah.
the elders would have made a pretty great impression on the work if they could have.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
um, and then, of course, another is the zero disclosure of finances. So that's
Mhm.
my list, and we don't need to keep
Mhm.
going because I don't want to nitpick, but
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
are the things that ultimately we couldn't abide by. So that's
Mhm.
just a full disclosure explanation.
Yeah, I love that. And Kayla, I admit that I'm quite emotional listening to your story. Um, there's a lot that you shared that is so beautiful and so heartbreaking and so it resonates so deeply even with me personally. A lot of what you talk about in your early years and your teens resonates a lot with me, and so I can't really do a response to your story justice because I'm so emotional, but I just thank you so much for sharing your heart and for sharing your experience and for helping so many of us to heal, really. And even this conversation has been so healing for me. I love how you put it is leaving meetings as much as it's a sacrifice and as hard as it is, it's going forward to life, and that's really beautiful.
Mhm. And you don't want to bowl people over in the process, but that's the part that's painful.
Mhm.
It,
Mhm.
it does cause loss, and
It
that's
does.
not the point.
Mhm.
But
It's
it's
not.
a byproduct that's sad.
Mhm. Exactly. It's so meaningful to me to have this conversation together means a lot. So thank you for being willing to say it on the record because I know it's very personal.
Well, you're welcome. It's the
Yes.
little I can do at this time, and
Yeah. I love that. Thank you so much.